Well, hey there guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, we're making a chessboard. Well, it wasn't that long ago on the show that we made a wooden chess set, and that was brought by this book here, Wooden Chess Sets by Jim Cape. Now, on today's show, I want to make a board for that chess set, but I want something different. And this book provided me with, well, basically the inspiration to make something different. And what it inspired me to make was a board that mounts on the wall. Essentially, it's pretty much the same as a board that you play on a horizontal surface, except it's upright. So the size and the shape of the squares of the board change a little, and the design changes a little. So without talking about it any further, let's get into it. And what we're going to need is to pick two species that have contrast. In my case, it's going to be my favorite, walnut and maple. And we need to mill them to 1/4 inch thick in order to make our squares. Well, if you had a keen eye during the milling clips, you would have seen that I was not milling maple, nor was I milling walnut. And what I was milling was cherry. And there's a reason for that. I've changed my mind about my playing board surfaces. With my pieces being maple and walnut, and because of the orientation of the board, I didn't want a dark square on the back, but yet I still wanted to maintain contrast between the two types of squares. This way the chess pieces will show up even on the dark squares as you're looking at the board. I feel that if I made it walnut, the person that was playing the darker walnut pieces, or for that matter, his opponent, would end up at a disadvantage because those dark pieces would actually be more difficult to see against the walnut background. So for that reason, I've kept my contrast by doing cherry and maple, and now it's time to cut our pieces. Well, a huge part of the success of this project relies on the quality of milling your stock. And by that, I mean making sure that it's flat and making sure that it's true. So what I've done here is I have milled one side of each one of these 1/4 inch thick pieces, and that will give us a positive reference point to register against our table saw fence as we're milling our pieces. You also want to make sure, please, that you check the squareness of your blade on your table saw before you ever touch it to your stock. Simple reason being is because if that table saw blade is out of square to the table, so are the edges of the tiles for your chessboard. So check the squareness of your tool, check the squareness of your miter fence. Make sure that everything is right on the money, and then you want to cut from each species here, both dark and light, you want to cut 32 pieces. Each one that will be 2 inches wide and 4 inches long. Well, I've always said that some of the most dangerous work out there is production work, and what I mean by that is work that is repetitious, work that does the exact same thing over and over and over again. So while you're cutting these, please pay attention and take your time. There's no rush to get these cut, and you don't want to have your mind wandering off to other things instead of concentrating at the task at hand. If you should find your mind wandering a little bit, nothing wrong with that. We're all human. But take a break at that point. It's time for you to walk away from it before disaster strikes. So all right, enough of my preaching here. Let me just show you here quickly what we're after with a board like this. It is a very different setup than a normal chessboard, only in the fact that the pieces are not square. So you may be wondering, what is going on? Did Kenny make a mistake? And no, not at all. This is a background. You have to remember that you're playing on a different plane than you normally would, and you have to take that into account. So I'm going to lay out all these pieces here and just show you what our final product is going to be somewhat like. And there you go. Eventually it's going to look something like this. Now you can see where it's important that all of our pieces are square to get good mating edges. Some of these look a little off, but that's just because they're not glued to anything. But at this point in time now, there's more pieces to cut for this backboard. So let's move on to those. Well, the next pieces that will complete our board will be a piece of 1/4-inch thick walnut, or a darker species of wood. It is 1/4-inch thick by 1/2 inch wide, and it is a grand total of 32 inches long. And this will sandwich our board in place. And this will act as a divider line between our playing area and our discard area, or our storage area. And what I mean by that is, as the game continues, there will be pieces that are removed from the board, and they will sit off to the sides in a storage area. And that's what brings me to these pieces right here. Got 2 pieces of cherry, 4 inches by 4 inches, and then from there I have cut another 14 tiles of maple that are 1/4 inch thick, and they are 4 inches by 4 inches. Now you may be wondering why I wouldn't just place them all one piece. Well, I didn't want it to look all one piece. I want it to look like tiles, the same as what the rest of the board does. So by mixing it up a little, we'll keep the natural flow of the way the board looks, where it's individual tiles instead of one solid piece here. And with that, this is essentially our playing area and our discard area, or our storage area, complete as far as the background goes. But now we need something to attach it to. So what I've done for the backer board is I've cut a piece of 1/2 inch thick plywood, and I have cut it so that it is 32 inches high or long and 25 inches wide. And the first thing that we want to do is I want to lay out all of my pieces to make sure that they fit properly on the board and that I'm happy with the way that they are laid out. And once you're happy with everything and you like the way it fits on your plywood, it's now time to lay it out for assembling the board or gluing down our playing tiles. So let's head over to the bench and I'll show you what to do with this. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to lay out this board into quadrants. In other words, we need to draw a center line both horizontally and vertically along our board. Well, now you want to place some straight edges along your center lines, and you want to take your time and make sure that you lay them out carefully. We need them to be square to each other and exactly on those center lines. So on one side here I have it clamped, and on the other side I'm just going to screw it through its mounting hole here right down to our board. And you don't have to worry about the hole showing up because you're going to be gluing tiles onto that afterwards. So it's just for the initial setup. Now before we crank it down, just double check that it's square, and then we can tighten it down. There we go. And we will do the same thing with our cross one. We'll just make sure that it's square, and then we'll screw it down. Well, at this point, it's time to start gluing the pieces in place. And I'm using a waterproof glue, Titebond 3. I'll tell you why. These are thin tiles that are attached to a plywood. And should there be moisture changes, humidity changes, you don't want things shifting and popping tiles off of your board. Waterproof glue like Titebond 3 has a little more elasticity and will kind of help to cushion that should it happen. But the first thing you want to do is you want to start with a dark tile. Check it to make sure that it fits nice and square. Check the tile that it doesn't have any splinters on it, and also, very importantly, check its surface to make sure that it has no extremely blatant or visible flaws. If they're on the back, it's okay because you're never going to see it. But what we want to do, I'm not going to do a full glue up video here because it would just be too long and bore the audience to tears. So we're just going to apply glue to the back in a thin layer, put it in place, hold it for a couple seconds, and then move on to the next piece, which of course will be the lighter species. And again, you want to test fit every single piece before you glue it in place. It's very important. You want to make sure that it fits perfectly and that you're happy with the way that it fits. Again, no splinters, no parts that are going to stop it from fitting nicely. And then when you're done that, you'll move on to the next piece. Again, inspect and test fit. And then the next piece. Now here is where you stop going across. You only need 4 pieces. A chessboard has 8 alternating squares across. So you will then alternate down here with a light colored species, and then you will glue in a dark, and then a light, which I don't have here but I will get, and eventually you will have all 4 rows here, a 4x4 panel, and at that point I'll come back and see you and we'll talk about the next step. Okay, and with that, that is our last tile for this quadrant glued into place. So now comes the hardest part, and that is we have to walk away from this for a while. This stuff needs to set up, but what I will suggest is that you make sure along this edge here that you clean up any squeeze out, because otherwise it's going to give you a problem when you go to mount that walnut divider piece. So make sure that you've cleaned up the squeeze out here along the edge. So guys, what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave this now for about an hour. Give this time to set up, and when I come back to it, I'll show you what to do next with the next quadrant. Well, it's been an hour and these pieces here are pretty much set up. I mean, you're not going to move them around now. They're not going to shift. So what we can do is remove one of these straight edges. You can choose which one, it doesn't matter. I'll remove this one. And then what you want to do is take your other straight edge and we're going to slide it along to match along that line to keep everything square, and basically we're going to glue down the second quadrant of our board. And once again, we have another quadrant glued up, just like that. All right, it's looking fantastic. I love this contrast between the cherry and the maple. But what we need to do at this point in time now is leave it again for another hour. Don't touch it, leave it alone. So to pass the time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start working on the brackets for the shelves. So while we're waiting for this, the book that I mentioned at the beginning of this series has a pattern for a small little shelf bracket. And these will be the brackets that will support our shelves that hold our pieces. So I have some 1/4 inch thick walnut here. We need to cut 24 of these brackets. So what I've done is I've made a template, and I'm just going to take them over to the scroll saw and cut them out. We will also need 16 of these cut, but they will be a little different. They will be from stock that is laminated, and what I'm going to do is take 2 walnut pieces and sandwich a piece of maple in between. So it will be walnut, maple, walnut. They'll be 3/4 of an inch thick, and I will cut 16 of these. So that gives us a little something to do while I'm waiting for this second quadrant to dry up. So I'm going to head to the scroll saw, get those cut, and then I'll show you what we ended up with. Okay, and now with that dried up for the past hour, we are going to do the exact same thing here with the 3rd quadrant and then the 4th. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to place a straight edge along here, and we will glue in this lower quadrant, and then after that is dry for an hour, I will glue in this top quadrant. I don't think we need another video of the setup and all that jazz. So I'm going to get all the board done here, and then we can move on with gluing the rest of our pieces onto our backboard. All right, and there we have all of our shelf brackets made up. You can see here these maple and walnut ones. What a nice contrast that is, and how great they look. So this is not where they sit. This is just sort of to make sure I had enough and to keep count. The next step here that we need to do is once all of our quadrants are glued down, we need to glue in our next pieces. And the first piece will be our 1/2 inch wide strip of walnut all the way along on the outsides of our playing area that will divide our storage from our playing section. And then as well, we can glue in our tiles for our 4x4 tiles for our storage section. And again, let it all set up. Once you get all your tiles glued down, let this thing sit at least bare minimum overnight to give it a chance to fully cure. Well, in some cases, no matter how careful you are in your glue ups, you are going to get some small little gaps in between the tiles. Now, I'm not concerned at all about the horizontal areas because those will have shelves eventually that will go right over those joints. But what I've done is taken some natural colored wood filler, and whether there was gaps or not, I went through each vertical joint and applied wood filler all the way along just to close in any that may be there. So now what you want to do is give this entire board a really good sanding and get a nice flat surface. And unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for this week, guys. This is a very time-consuming process and a very time-consuming project. One thing I will say that up until now, if you have taken your time and made sure that everything is square, your blades, your cuts, etc., you should have a fairly nice looking board at this point in time. If you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Click that bell so that you don't miss the notifications of future episodes of the show. Guys, there's a lot more to come on this build. I hope you've enjoyed it so far, and I hope you're going to join me for the continuation of this next week when I bring you yet another woodworking video.